Welcome to our Divorce Recovery Seminar. I'm Bruce Wadzeck, a minister with the Princeton Church of Christ. Our title tonight is The Art of Learning to Let Go. Unfortunately, when a traumatic experience like separation and divorce occur in our relationships, we tend to either dwell on the past and live in the past full of regrets and concerns and what ifs, or we jump into the future and imagine that the past is going to repeat itself and that I really have no hope for an intimate relationship and friendship and a marriage. It's just not in the cards for me because of this traumatic loss that I have experienced. And really, when you think about it, learning to come to grips with loss is one of the most fundamental life skills, not only dealing with this very traumatic experience, but in general. For example, the 1 to 2-year-old that begins to start leaving mama's side or their caretaker's side and begins to venture out into the world and to become more independent, they have to deal with the loss of the security of their mom and to gain their natural independence. Sometimes you see little children that'll leave mom's side and they'll wander off a ways and walk around a corner. Suddenly they'll turn around to see where their mother is and they don't see her and they cry out and panic and mother has to come and pick them up. This is that loss of security. But gradually, if we successfully navigate this early stage of gaining independence, then we grow and move on. Children that have to leave the home and go into daycare, or when they enter kindergarten, also experience a loss of the security of the home that they are in. And now they have to adjust to a new and a different environment. And so they have to come to grips with that loss as well as the gaining of independence. And then, of course, adolescents are learning increasingly to take responsibility and make decisions for their life and gain further independence. But in the process of that, they lose their innocence as they go through adolescence. And this is another significant loss that we must come to grips with. And then as we move into our adulthood and we leave our home, whether it's going off to college or whether it's moving into an apartment, we experience the loss of the family of origin. We no longer are all living together in one place, but we have become independent and have moved on and moved out. And this too is a loss that we must come to grips with. And then we experience a number of normal later losses. We get into a job we really like, and then all of a sudden it comes to an end, and we have to experience the loss of this significant job, or maybe even an entire career, and we have to move on to a new work and to a new situation. We also experience, I think, the loss of our youth, the loss of being as physically strong and capable gradually over time. This is a loss we have to come to grips with. We also experience the loss of people that are close to us, grandparents, parents, friends, the death, or they move far away and we lose contact with people that we were close to. We have to come to grips with all of these losses, all of them preparing us for the most significant loss we have to come to grips with, and that's death itself, where we're going to have to face the loss of our body and the reality of death. So our entire life is a preparation for the final loss we have to meet. But of all the various losses that we deal with, the death of our spouse and divorce from a spouse are perhaps the most stressful losses that we'll have to come to grips with. So the question really becomes, how do we deal with loss? We all develop our own ways of dealing with loss. Now, some people just pretend it isn't happening. So this is kind of the denial approach, where we pretend that our spouse isn't really gone. They're coming back real soon, when that isn't a reality. Or perhaps we become angry and find someone or something to blame. Blame it on our spouse, blame it on their family, blame it on a job loss, blame it on a variety of things. Maybe this is a way we come to grips with loss, a constant search for someone or something to blame for the loss. Or perhaps we just get depressed at significant losses and we withdraw from social interaction. That's another way that people deal with loss. And then another way that's fairly common is we just get real busy and we become a workaholic and we just don't think about the loss at all. I remember an individual that came to our divorce recovery seminar and then came to our divorce recovery support group that meets twice a month. And I remember at every divorce recovery support group that this particular individual who had gone through a divorce and was trying to deal with it would offer as a solution to the other members in the group, "Oh, I'm just keeping myself busy. You know, I joined some new clubs and organizations. I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and I'm doing a whole lot better because I'm so busy." And then one day they stopped coming to the support group. And after they'd been gone for a while, I didn't know whether they were at a healthy place and moving on. I gave them a call, and this particular individual had worked themselves into a health crisis. You know, they had become very depressed and had to be treated. So just busyness will not solve the issues we have to face in the loss of a marriage. Some people just avoid any further hurt. They decide, I'm not going to date again, I'm not going to have any relationships with those of the opposite sex. If I just avoid that altogether, I'll just never be hurt like this before, as I was before. Or perhaps we seek, and this is all too common, what I call the instant replacement. You know, we look for somebody that reminds us of our previous spouse, or just somebody that is interested in us, and we instantly jump 100% into this new relationship and try to forget the past relationship by being all encompassingly involved in this new relationship with an instant partner. You know, pour in, add milk, instant. You've got what you want. But of course, all of these are not really healthy responses to loss. Our problem seems to be one of two extremes. Number one, we are trying to avoid legitimate suffering over our loss of a partner and a reasonable acceptance of our responsibility in the divorce. And we do this by escaping or by blaming. Let me just say that again. I think this is important. We avoid legitimate suffering. You see, to be able to go through the process of grieving, we have to suffer some. And there are legitimate forms of suffering where we reasonably grieve over our loss. And then there's the extreme suffering where we inflict things on ourselves as if we're going to punish ourselves into a better person, which is not legitimate form of suffering. So we have to make sure the suffering we're going through is legitimate, that it's not some artificial thing we're putting ourselves through. And then secondly, we also have to come to grips with our reasonable responsibility for the end of the relationship. It's not all the other person's fault. It's certainly not all your fault. But being reasonable about it. Well, how did I contribute to this? What could I have done better? What can I accept as my reasonable responsibility? And in so doing, we will move through this process and learn to let go by accepting that reasonable responsibility and be willing to suffer for legitimate things that we should grieve over. The other extreme is self-blaming and a punishing attitude. When we castigate and harangue ourselves over the divorce, we decide we are worthless and terrible because the relationship ended. So this sort of other extreme of the situation is inflicting all kinds of suffering that's not legitimate on ourselves, as if we're punishing ourselves for being bad, and we're overly catastrophizing and emphasizing our responsibility in this. There are two people in the relationship, and when a relationship fails, both people have some responsibility, and we're not the sole source of this, and self-blaming and haranguing will not get you to a healthy place, and it will prolong your suffering, and perhaps you'll find yourself stuck in this kind of very negative attitude. But what are some of the areas we must come to grips with and let go relating to our divorce? First of all, there are mental areas that we have to deal with. You see, when we married, we had dreams, scenarios, plans to live happily ever after. And we have to accept that this divorce is the death of a dream. We have to let go of that dream in order to move on. We have to accept that this is not going to be our future. Also, our memories of the past. And to begin with, as we go through a process of suffering, all we remember perhaps are the happy memories. Or, on the other extreme, we remember only the bad memories of our marriage. And we're always asking, what if I or she or he did this, or what if that? And just a lot of mental gymnastics that it's too late, and this is not going to be helpful for us. We need to sort out these things and come up with a realistic perspective on our own responsibility, and then to let go of the rest, including our dream. Secondly, there are social dimensions to letting go. As a couple, you had couple friends, you had other couples, there's family, and people that you as a couple knew together. And immediately after you go through separation and divorce and you're no longer a couple, you have to realize that many of the couples that knew you, since you're no longer a couple, may tend to fade away. They may be pleasant to begin with, but they may tend to withdraw because, in some senses, your failure may be a threat to their relationship as well. And of course, you're probably going to lose some family members. They tend to take their own person's side and demonize the other person. And so there's a great deal of shuffling. And if we've only been involved in our immediate family and their family and our family, we may find ourselves very, very alone. We have to make new friends. And we have to sort through the old ones to find out which ones are going to last beyond our couple relationship. We have to move on and not withdraw, which is a tendency. I'm hurting and this is difficult and nobody's going to want to hear this, so I just withdraw, which tends to lead to a deeper depression and no healthy recovery. Then there are even physical dimensions of loss. The presence of your spouse in the house. Places you go that reminds you of your spouse. Everyday events remind you of the good and bad times that the two of you had together. And we have to let those go. We have to learn to live in the present, not in the past. And there are spiritual dimensions as well to divorce. We may have always believed that divorce is wrong, but now we find ourselves divorced. And sometimes not because we wanted it. It takes two people to choose to get married, but only one person to precipitate a divorce. I must remain married no matter what the circumstances may be. And that may have been your commitment, but the other party bailed out, and you're having to accept a new reality. Our own identity is threatened in all of this. Who am I? I was this married person to my spouse. This was my identity. And so sometimes our very identity is threatened. Or we just think, I failed at marriage, therefore there's no good future for me. So these are all kind of spiritual issues that we have to grapple with and come to a positive resolution that, yes, as we live in the present, we can be hopeful for the future if we are able to let go of the past. Finally, we need to be aware of the natural process of coming to grips with losses of various types. The first stage of this grieving process tends to be denial. This isn't happening to me, we say to ourselves. They'll change their mind and come back. And so we say all of these things thinking that what is really happening isn't happening to us, that we're not really getting divorced. They're going to change their mind. Something's going to change the circumstances. Denial. And the second stage, once it becomes clear that our denials are not true, we tend to become angry. It's over, and I'm mad. We think of things like, why did they do this and that? We think about all the things we put up with, all the things we had to go through to try to maintain the relationship. And we made all these sacrifices, all to no end, because it ended anyway. And so we're angry. And sometimes that anger goes out to relatives and friends, and it's kind of dispersed among many sources that we become angry at. Even we become angry at God, as if it was God's fault for not making our marriage work. And then after anger, the next stage of grief tends to be loneliness. There's a kind of withdrawal. We're kind of no longer so angry, but we're lonely, probably a little depressed. And we raise questions of our identity. Who am I now that I'm no longer a part of this couple relationship? Now I'm not connected to her relatives and mine in the same way that I was before. And this is a tough stage to go through. And as I said, oftentimes is accompanied by stages of depression. And then finally we bottom out in the fourth stage, what I would call the emptiness stage. We questioned our adequacy, our competency. We asked the question, can I go on? I just feel like such a failure. I just feel like that my most important life goal has been blown up, and I'm unsure of what to do. We face aspects of life that seem overwhelming. What does my life mean now that I'm not going to be married? Now that I'm disconnected in some way from my spouse? And a lot of questions are raised at that stage, some spiritual questions as well. But the fifth stage finally comes as a relief, peace and acceptance. We have succeeded in processing and learning, and we have begun to let go of the past dream, of the past relationship that's now over, and we began to move on with our life by living in the present and not being apprehensive about what the future will bring. Now, of course, this all sounds quite simple, step 1, 2, 3, but it's never quite that easy. You'll go from one stage to the other, then you'll backtrack. You'll be in denial, and then you'll be angry, and then you'll go back to denial and back and forth. But this is in general a process we must go through in order to let go so that we can healthily move on. You see, it's important that we come to grips with the reality that we live in. And we have to learn the skill of how to let go. And this is not only of this, there are many things, as I noted before, we have to learn to let go. People that can't let go get overwhelmed with the baggage and tend to sink in the waters of life and not come back up. Get super depressed, perhaps withdraw from life, and terrible things can happen. But that's a decision that we have to make, not to go down that road. But remember, we need support and help from others to successfully navigate this. That's why I encourage everyone to be a part of a support group. And I think it's especially good if you can find a support group that's full of other people that are going through the same thing that you are. Now, your family and friends may try to be supportive, but they may emotionally tire of hearing your story over and over again, where a support group is much more likely that are going through the same thing to be able to resonate with what you're saying and not be upset that you're repeating yourself, that you're going through these feelings and it lasts for a time. So it's very important not to withdraw, but to engage with people. And a divorce recovery support group, I think, is very helpful in this regard. And so my hope is that you learn the good skills of how to let go so that you can learn to live. People that can't let go of their past, of whatever kind that's necessary they let go, are not free to live. And I pray that you'll find that freedom.